Here we go. Oh no, you know what I should put on? Don't mind my outfit. Don't talk about it. Why did I not think of this before I started filming? Ouch. How does one put on earrings without looking? Am I just inept? It's perfect. First day of fall being in a couple of days, I thought it would be really fun to share with you guys some of my personal favorite reads for fall, books that I think you should read, really fun, atmospheric, spooky literature. So we're gonna get into the video. I really hope you enjoy it and take some recommendations away from it. So the first two that I am going to start out with are maybe a no-brainer for some people, but I just feel like if you're gonna take any books away from this list, I personally think these are the best, and I love both of these so much. I think I gave both of these 5 stars when I read them, so would highly recommend. These are both by the same author. He's the king of horror. You know I had to recommend at least some because I do love Stephen King's writing. I don't talk about him too much on my channel, but I really do read a lot of his work, so we're gonna get into my 2 personal favorites of his, and that is gonna be Pet Sematary and Salem's Lot. And coincidentally, I'm wearing my Salems Lot earrings right now. This is my favorite King book, but we're gonna talk about this in a second. So, first up, Pet Sematary. I feel like people generally have a good idea about what this book is about, but if you don't. So this follows the Creed family. They recently moved to a small town in Maine. Big shocker that a Stephen King book takes place in Maine. This pet cemetery was created by children, hence why the name is spelled wrong, but this is just where all the children of this neighborhood buried their dead pets, and this just happens to be behind the Creed's home. Later in the book, their family pet dies, and the dad can literally not bear to tell his daughter that their cat died, so he's talking to his neighbor, and he tells Lou, who is the father, about this like cemetery behind the cemetery where he can bury this cat. And essentially the dad will no longer have to worry about telling his daughter that the cat died because the cat will come back to life. So the cat Church does come back, but he's not quite the same as he was before. It's a little creepy. I honestly think it's a little bit funny, but the book gets less funny later. I feel like it's a natural progression. You know, you can kind of follow where this book is gonna go. So I'm gonna leave that up to your imagination for now. But I would really recommend Pet Sematary. The whole conversation of this book is like man versus death and essentially the inevitability of death, but it's seen through a paranormal lens, which I think is very interesting to tackle it that way. And honestly, the last page of this book, like I was writing some notes like just on my phone about this book, and I was low-key getting scared like thinking about the last page of this book. Like it's not, I don't, oh god, it just gets me every time. Like, you really should read this book, it's so good. So as for Salem's Lot, this is a more traditional like monster story. It's got like a tangible supernatural element, like it's an actual thing that is like wreaking havoc on this town, and it's just so fun. This book is about a single writer. He moves to a town in Maine, again, big shocker, and there's a lot of weird happenings in this town, and he decides to find out. Probably not his best decision, but it does make for a good story. One of my favorite aspects of this book is that it follows a bunch of different groups of people, and then eventually the storylines all converge like as the book goes on, and it's just so interesting to see how they come together. Stephen King does this in a lot of his books, and I always find it very fascinating and also satisfying to see all the characters somehow intertwine. I'm not gonna tell you what like the main antagonist of this book is because it's not really explicitly said until like halfway through the book. And you can go in knowing what it is, like it's not a huge spoiler, but I just personally found it really fun to try and figure out what it was myself. I just really enjoyed this book. I read it late last September and it was like the perfect time for it, so I would so recommend you read this book if you like horror. Next up, I'm gonna kind of move on to an obvious one, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this book this summer and it was so good. I really wish I would have read this in October. You're following Victor Frankenstein, who is obsessed with science. He ends up going to a university and he somehow figures out how to create life. So obviously he does in fact create life, and it's hideous. I swear throughout the book he calls this poor monster a wretch like 50 times, and I'm like, you're the problem, Victor, stop it. So inevitably the monster becomes an outcast from society, Even its creator hates it. One of my favorite aspects of this book is this whole backstory from the monster's point of view, from the time when he first ran away from Victor to the point in time that they're meeting again in the future. And it's just so interesting to see how he picked up language, how he developed deep connections with people that he's never personally met. And he just really seems like such a poor creature. You literally just feel so bad for him because he just wanted friends. But overall, it's just a pretty obvious commentary on society that's very interesting. It's great gothic vibes for the season, and it's also kind of dark academia in a way, because there is a chunk of time where you do follow Victor at school, and he's talking to professors, interacting with just general academia motifs. So yeah, if you haven't read Frankenstein, you really should. Moving on to one of my personal favorite books from last year, and that is The October Country by Bradbury. This is a short story collection that is honestly some of the weirdest literature I've ever read. Like, I don't know. Literally the only central theme with them is that they're weird and that they take place in October. And if that's not a great fall recommendation, then I don't know what is. So a couple of my personal favorites include, there's one in here that's called The Emissary, which really reminds me of, what's that book? Pet Semetary. A lot of similar themes there. The Scythe in here is also very interesting. It's about this man who's just cutting a wheat field maybe, and I think every wheat stalk is like the representation of someone's life. So essentially he's like death himself. I don't really know what I was supposed to take away from that story, but I do remember that I liked it. Yeah, again, I don't really know how to talk about short story collections as a whole. I don't know, but I do really love this book and recommend it. It's also illustrated. Got some nice drawings throughout there. Very spooky, yes. So yeah, read The October Country if you're into some short stories. Oh, I also forgot to mention The Small Assassin. I'll just read you what it says on the back of here. It says, a fine, healthy baby boy was the new mother's dream come true, or her worst nightmare. Basically, the whole time she's like, that baby's gonna kill me, and her husband's like, bitch, you need to chill, but little does he know. I still laugh thinking about it. It's ridiculous. My next recommendation for you is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Also, can we talk about this edition? It's gorgeous. So I've only read 2 of Shirley Jackson's novels, and I loved both of them so much. So much so that I'm actually gonna make The Haunting of Hill House an honorable recommendation. Honorable mention, that's the one. Super good Halloween, fall time vibes, creepy house, but I'm not gonna go into this one because I feel like this is kind of a no-brainer, and I wanted to talk about the one that I feel like gets mentioned less. But basically everyone in the town hates these 2 sisters and their uncle that live in a big mansion off on the outskirts of town. Honestly, I just feel like you should go into this book not really knowing too much. It's a ride. I really enjoyed this book. It's really short, so it's a fast read. Lots of gothic elements when they are talking about the house and just moving about the house. And I just had a good time, so yes, either read this or this. I love Shirley Jackson's work. Next up, I think I'm gonna move into a couple of books about witches. I think I have 3 to talk about. So maybe this is skewing more Halloween recommendations, but oh well. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. I read this book I think last September, and again, it was like the perfect time to read it. This book follows Hannah, who is an elemental witch, meaning she can control things like earth, wind, fire, whatever. Is that a band? Maybe. I don't know. At an end of school bonfire, it turns out that one of her classmates ends up being involved in a blood ritual. Blood sacrifice? Something to that effect. So after this ritual happens, signs of even more dark magic start showing up all over town, and Hannah takes it upon herself with the help of her ex-girlfriend Veronica to figure out what's going on. Throughout this book, Hannah also meets a girl named Morgan, who she is very into, but dealing with supernatural crises on the daily does make it a little bit hard to start kindling a new relationship. So this book also takes place in Salem, Massachusetts. And yeah, I would really recommend this. Also, the second book, This Come on a Break, I hope to get a copy of that soon. I don't have it yet, but I have read it. I read it earlier this year, and I love that as well. So both of these books I would really recommend. Next up, I'm going to talk about A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This book follows Diana, who is a historian working at Oxford, but she's also a witch. Now, she doesn't necessarily want to be a witch, but she is a witch. When she is going through the stacks, doing her historian things, she ends up finding this bewitched alchemical manuscript. So after she has touched this manuscript, so many other supernatural beings start like bugging her for it because it's a very important manuscript and everybody wants it. She also attracts the attention of a young vampire whose name is Matthew Claremont, and clearly they get together. You know how these things work. Also, at one point in this book, she goes to stay with her two aunts for a while, and her two aunts very much remind me of the two aunts that are in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I was basically just picturing these two actresses as the two witches in this book. Fun witch book, takes place at Oxford, so you got some nice dark academia vibes. I would recommend the first book. I can't say I would recommend the second book necessarily. I've only read 50 pages of the second book. But it was very info dumpy, like old dude philosopher information that I was just not into, so I DNF'd it a long time ago, to be honest. But I still really like the first book. So the last witch recommendation that I have for you is V.E. Schwab's The Near Witch. This book is about Lexi, who lives in a small town named Near. One night she thinks she sees a boy in her backyard just vanish into smoke, and then the next day the children of Near start disappearing from their beds. A lot of this is very reminiscent of some old myths that parents typically tell their children to scare them, but the people of Near seem to immediately pin the blame on this boy that a couple of people have seen milling about. However, Lexi is not so sure. I know a lot of people don't like this book, but I personally really enjoyed it. I feel like if you go into this with the expectation of it being a first novel, you won't be disappointed. Like, obviously it's not gonna be as good as the rest of her like iconic series, but I still really enjoyed this a lot. It's got that staple small town witchy atmosphere. It's got a cute love story that also happens throughout it, but it doesn't necessarily overshadow the plot. And also, Lexi goes around and shuts these men of her village down constantly, which I'm always here for. So I would really recommend this book. So I just grabbed these books right before I started filming these, so I don't really have anything written down about them, but I wanted to add in some middle grade recommendations. So the first one would be Small Spaces by Katherine Arden. I just love this middle grade. It was so cute. It's about this class that goes on a class trip to like a cornfield. And then the bus breaks down naturally. And then our main character, Ollie, and a couple of her friends get off the bus for some reason. Honestly, I don't remember too much about this book, but I do remember that I liked it. It's got creepy scarecrows in it. Honestly, a little spooky, which is always fun. And then I also have to recommend the Cassidy Blake series by Victoria Schwab as well. This just follows Cassidy Blake and her best friend Jacob, who is a ghost. Cassidy's parents have this TV show called The Inspectors, where they go around to different cities in the world and they look at haunted places basically, but Cassidy can actually go into the veil. And when she's in the veil, she can see all of the ghosts of this place and she like helps them move on, that whole thing. And that marks the end of all of my recommendations that I have for you. So that was a lot of talking. I don't think I've ever fully done a video where I give like actually good descriptions of books. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm tired now. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know down below. Do any of these interest you? Do you have any fall recommendations for me? Let me know. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.